Hi lovely people, I'm Carly Porter, and today I thought it would be really fun to show you one of the many design challenges that are included in my Graffiti Quilting online masterclass. You can get all the information at carlyporter.com. I do a yearly cohort, so check that out to see when is the best time to sign up. As you go throughout the Graffiti Quilting curriculum, not only is there over 100 hours of on-demand content for you to watch and learn from, but we also do live stream classes where we can get together and I answer questions in real time. And I also have tons of design challenges embedded throughout the book to help you on your free motion quilting journey. So today I thought it would be fun to walk you through one of the design challenges from chapter 3 in the book, which are design principles. Now, the cool thing about this section of the book is that these are principles that can be applied to any motif or quilting design that you have in your toolbox of skills of free motion quilting. So let's jump into the design challenge and you can get a little taste for what graffiti quilting is all about. Now, it might feel a little overwhelming because the textbook has over 360 pages of quilting goodness, but if you like my teaching style and you like the way that the video is presented, you'll see a lot more of that when you sign up for the graffiti quilting course. So let's jump in and get to it. Hello, lovely people. I hope you are enjoying your graffiti quilting journey. I thought it would be fun to go over one of our design challenges from your graffiti quilting textbook. So the challenge we are going to work on today is design challenge 3.2. So this is in the 3rd chapter of the book, the 2nd design challenge. So let's jump in and read what it says. So I just have my iPad loaded with the design challenge from carlyporter.com/GQ3. So this is where you can find all of the information, all of the online content that goes with the printed content in the book. So for design challenge 3.2, it says, being able to differentiate between echoes and layers is an awesome way to assert more control over your free motion quilting. Sometimes it is really easy to do one or the other without really deliberately thinking about it. Choose 10 different design skeletons and draw them the same way on 2 separate pages in your sketchbook. Then on one page, apply echoes to all of them. On the other, apply layers. Finally, set the pages side by side and compare how different they turned out based on those variances. So this is a really fun and fairly simple challenge because you don't actually have to quilt all of these out in order to solidify the understanding of the difference between echoes and layers. So we are going to pull up a page in our sketchbook and do this exercise together. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer in my Procreate file, and I'm just going to start by creating a few different very simple shapes that I could use in my graffiti quilting. And these don't necessarily have to be from the book. There may be shapes that you know of already, and there may be some that you have learned in other areas of your quilting journey. So I'm just going to kind of come up with very simple shapes that we can do together. So the first thing I'm doing is a skeleton here. So I've done a flower and some pebbles. Let's maybe also do a teardrop. Maybe we can do a leaf. And we could also do a closed flower petal. And let's think of one more, maybe a curl. All right, so for the first round, let's add some layers to our designs. So I'm going to use a different color so we can see it very clearly, and I'm also going to make it a little bit smaller just so that we can always see the black skeletal structure. All right, so if I'm adding layers to this flower petal, I think what it would look like is something like this. So notice and remember that with our layers, we are tucking in those points and touching each time we add. So remember, layers and echoes are kind of like fraternal twins. They are very similar, but a little bit different. And the difference is that layers are just a little more touchy-feely. Now we can also even add layers on the inside of our flower petal shape. And you would imagine that this would all be the same color thread as we are adding layers to our skeletal structure. All right. Okay, now let's talk about this cluster of pebbles. So we could add layers just by tucking in around the edges of our cluster. This is very similar, as you can see, to the flower that we just did. Layers are going to get nice and tight, and they're going to give those high fives down in those points, right? They're going to actually touch. All right, we could even do inside layers of these pebbles, maybe something like this. Okay. All right, now we have our teardrop here. So if we wanted to add a layer to our teardrop, we could do a skinny one that starts and stops down at the same point. This technically could be considered an echo, but we are still touching down at this point. So I'm going to call it a layer for now. Let's think about how we could do some inside layers inside of our teardrop. Maybe something like this, where we do contour lines going up. That would definitely feel very layered. Or we could even come in and just layer a part of that teardrop, and then maybe layer another part of that teardrop, and maybe another part. So see how we're starting to close in that space with inner layers that are all touching each other. Now on the outside, maybe we could do the same thing, where we layer on the outside on one point, and then add a layer just on another part of that edge. Okay. All right, with the leaf, when we are adding layers, I would say that it would touch at the top and at the bottom. Now remember, with leaves and with flower petal shapes, the more you layer it, the chubbier it's going to get, but it's not going to get any taller. And we'll talk more about this when we do the echoes. And we can even add inner layers inside of here. And maybe we can do some kind of overstitching fill-in with every other area, so that it has kind of a positive and negative space, high contrast feel to it, which is another design principle that we have in part 3 of the textbook. Okay, so notice that my leaf shape has gotten much chubbier, but it's not any taller than it was originally. All right, now the same thing here we can do with the closed flower petal. We can add some layers that go on the sides, and again, see how it's getting chubbier on the left and right side. And we can add maybe an inner layer in here. Okay, or instead of that, we could add some layers that go up from one side to the other. And it kind of looks like a glass blown marble. And then of course, with our wingmen, one of the main wingmen that we don't want to forget about, especially if we're making an art quilt or a wall hanging quilt, is our overstitching. All right, and now let's try some layers with the curl. So remember that if you have studied the curl design from part 4 in the book, we talk about how we can turn the curl from a line into a shape, which is a design principle in part 3, or you can also see some of the curl filler motifs from part 9 in the book. So let's add some layers to this curl, which are going to feel very natural and normal, because that is kind of part of the anatomy of a curl, is those layers. If I add layers to my curl, we're going to go in and back out, right? So we've seen this before. Maybe I could even just add a small layer and some more layers that are very close together, so that we get that positive and negative space that we're looking for. Okay, and we can add another layer that we tuck in here, and we can layer it again here. Okay, and maybe we can add some contour line style layers, right? So contour lines are just a bunch of arced layers that we are stacking on top of each other in a defined path or a defined space. Okay, so we have our motifs here that we have added layers to. Now let's do the same exercise, but instead of doing layers, we're going to do echoes. So I'm going to erase that layer, well, turn that layer off for now, and let's do a different color here for our echoes. So if I were to echo this flower, it is going to look probably how you can guess it'll look. So it would look something like this. So remember, our echoes are a little germophobic and less touchy-feely. Okay. Now, one thing to remember with echoes is that it is harder to create shapes versus lines if you're using echoes, because if I were to try to fill this in, see how there's no defined space, whereas with the layers, when they're closed, it's a lot easier to fill that space in. Neither of them is a right or wrong choice. They're just a choice to think about. So to finish this, I would probably close that off, and then we can also overstitch around the outer edge of our echoes. And then maybe even inside of here, we can use that echo space to create a deeper sense of contrast or a more positive and negative space. Like so. Okay, and now see with our echo, I mean, for the most part, we made this a continuous line right here, but we could have stopped and cut our thread from here and started right there to get a true natural echo. Okay, so same thing with here with our cluster of pebbles is we can, wherever we ended, we could stop and cut our thread. And remember, with echoes, we're not actually touching the shape that we are echoing, or not very much at all. There are a couple here that we will touch in some very specific start and end points, but for the most part, it's going to be very hands-off or standoffish. Okay, so we have an echo there. Now we could even stop and cut our thread and echo again. Now in the textbook, there is a quilt that shows different border designs. I believe it's called the Kona Cotton Solid Swap Quilt. That shows different border designs that are perfect for echoes. So maybe in this echo, instead of just doing zigzags, we could do some pebbles traveling along that edge. And remember, we've talked about pebbles before. In part 4 of the book, you can either go changing direction and hugging the edges, or if you just want one edge overstitched, which would be this line here, then you can do the same direction of pebble every time. It just takes a little mental practice to make sure you keep your pebbles nice and circular, because you're going the same direction with each pebble, which can be kind of a trip on our brains. So it's not impossible. It's just improbable. No, I'm just kidding. It just takes a little bit of practice. So we can add pebbles here, like so. And there we go. All right, so we've done our pebbles. We can even do another echo around the outside of these as well. And maybe in the inside of our pebbles, you could come in here and stitch another circle and stitch another so that these become echoes. Now, I don't personally love to stop and jump with my thread very often, But another thing that you could do is maybe put like some crystals inside of those pebbles, depending on the size of your pebbles or where they are at on your quilt. Not sure, but that's another fun idea of something you can do. All right, so let's add an echo to our teardrop. So if I were doing an echo on this teardrop, I think I would still start down at this bottom corner because, you know, we're quilting with a continuous line. But that's why I said when we were doing the layers that this felt very similar, that a layer and an echo are the same. Okay, but maybe if we want to make our main skeletal structure also be an echo, then instead of doing something that really touches the sides of our skeleton a lot, we could do something that really just makes it have a lot of space in the middle of there. So this is still kind of an echo area, even though they all start and end at the same point. It's still providing that echo-like space. Okay. And again, echoes, like I said, are a great place to experiment with positive and negative space. So maybe we do another echo on top, but then we fill in our previous echo with something that's really dense so that our outer echo is going to shine and pop and be really bright because of that unquilted space. It's going to allow the batting to really do a good job of puffing up because we are quilting down that inner echo, and it's creating a really nice sense of contrast. All right, so with the leaf shape, remember how it's going to get taller when we echo it versus getting wider when we layer it. Okay, so if I do echoes only, I'm going to run out of space, or my motif is going to get really big really quickly. So typically with long skinny shapes like the leaf shape, I like to just do one or maybe two echoes. And then I like to use the main skeletal structure as an echo, just like we did with our teardrop, doing something really slender in there. We can do the same thing in our leaf shape if we just do something very slender. Then it feels like an echo. Okay, and again with positive and negative space, we can either add some contrast by overstitching our outer echo quite a bit and trying to constantly split the difference between those passes so that they really fill in nicely and look really nice and dark, and then see how bright our echo area looks because it's unquilted. Okay. So with the closed flower petal, we're going to get a similar effect. With an echo, it's going to get wider and taller versus a layer only getting wider, right? So we're seeing that again. We can do something that makes it kind of feel like our main skeletal shape is the echo, and we're echoing something that's a little bit more intricate. Oh, look how pretty that looks. I love doing those type of designs. I feel like they're very show-offy. Okay, and again, if we're gonna echo up tall, maybe we can add a layer because we want a little bit more girth without more height. So echoes and layers, they play really well together because those fraternal twins are very versatile in giving us kind of a rounded out shape, or like splitting the difference of the shape that we're going for. If we don't want it too tall or we don't want it too wide, we can kind of split that difference. All right, now with the curl, again, remember how the curl having the layers is kind of the default version. So in part 4, when we talk about how to quilt a curl, the default I've talked about is just tucking in your points, always tucking in your edges, instead of doing an echo that might look more like this, right? See how it's easier to follow that shape and get a positive and negative space? So I think we could be a little bit more flexible with the echo that we use. where what I like to do is I will start with a layer and close it so that I have a nice closed off curl shape, and then I can echo that whole thing. So it would look like this. Okay, so I still have a discernible shape that I can do something with. Now I like to just, typically what I do is I will overstitch that echo. Now remember, I also want to clarify and remind you, with overstitching, the amount of overstitching that you do on your quilting is going to depend a lot on what type of quilt you're making. So if you are quilting functional bed quilt where you want to use graffiti quilting as an all-over design across your quilt, then you really only need to use overstitching to travel from point A to point B. But when you're making a wall hanging quilt or an art quilt that is going to hang on the wall, and you want that thread to really pack a punch and really be the main event that's really showing off your free motion quilting, that's when you can really take a lot more time with your overstitching, because you're not only using your overstitching in that case to travel, but also to really brighten up and add a lot of contrast between your fabric and your thread. All right, so I'm gonna overstitch this one more time, assuming that I'm practicing for a mini quilt or a wall hanging quilt. So what I like to do is I like to leave that echo space completely open and unquilted, especially because I really like this shape in here. Like I really like this, how the eye can flow inside of that echo into that little curl shape right there. And then I will fill in the curl itself with something. So something that is going to give it kind of the same effect of what we had here, where we filled in one of the echoes with something really dense and then let the next echo just live free so that it would really pop and be bold. So in here, we could do like a row of pebbles up that curl. And when I get to the little like kind of head of the curl, I like to just put a little teardrop shape like that, just like I've done down at the bottom. And then I can travel back down, overstitching that other side and back down. All right, so let's take a look at both layers of drawing that we've done. We did the echoes in the teal color and the layers in the pink. I'm gonna turn both layers on at the same time so that we can see the differences between how different those designs turned out based on choosing layers versus echoes. All right, so let's turn on our layer. And you can see together, right, there's some differences. I can also make these layers transparent so that we can kind of see the differences, right? And then let's also do this. Let's turn the transparency back up on both of them. And then I am going to duplicate my main layer and I'm going to merge these down and merge these down. And let's also make this a little smaller, and I am going to move things just a little bit. So let's take our teal layer and move this. Oh, I don't want to quite move it off the edge. There we go. Actually, here, we're going to rearrange the whole thing. And I want to put these next to each other so that you can really compare as we see them side by side. Whoops. I gotta be careful to not put the pink ones on the pink ones. Okay, now let's move this guy over here. So now those are side by side. You're also learning some Procreate in here. If you are practicing your graffiti quilting drawings on your iPad, I'm sure you are having a lot of fun with Procreate in the process as well. We're just trying to make space for all of these. Move that there. Move the pink one down a little bit so you can see the differences with those. And then let's move this pink one over here. Actually, I kind of want the pink ones to always be to the right of the teal ones. There we go. Okay, so we have the same skeletal structures with each of these. The black is exactly the same for each one, but you can start to see what types of motifs and aesthetic you can get from using layers and echoes interchangeably. All right, and one more thing I want to do in this demonstration to kind of drive this point home. Let's make a whole new layer. I want you to really remember how you can use echoes and layers interchangeably and together and in different combinations to get different wingmen that can really enhance a single design. So let's draw like 2 or 3 more skeletons, and then we will do one more round where we actually will do echoes and layers together. And you can see how just by using echoes and layers, we can get a different feel for those skeletal structures. All right, so let's do another little, I'm gonna make this a little bigger again. All right, let's do another little cluster of pebbles. And then let's do a closed flower petal. All right, so I'm going to do this now in purple with our layers and echoes together. Make a new layer here. All right, so if I want to layer my pebbles, I'm going to really tuck in with each one that I'm layering. All right, now if I'm going to echo it, it's going to look more like this. And then we can actually also do what I like to call notched layers, where instead of tucking points down in and creating this V shape, instead what we're going to do is touch and then backtrack and then echo, but add these little notches as we go. And see how it starts to really look like things are layered, one thing behind another, behind another. Like so. Okay, so all in that one motif, we have quite a variation of designs. All right, now let me move this one over so we have a little more space for it. All right, so let's just alternate between echoes and layers. So I'm going to start, let's do an inside echo and layer, and then I'm going to overstitch. Okay, and now I'm going to layer and echo and layer and echo. How cool is that? It really looks a lot harder to quilt than it actually is, because we are just being deliberate about where we hit those points and where we leave that space in between. So I hope you enjoyed this demonstration for Design Challenge 3.2. I know that sometimes it's kind of either tricky to understand the wingmen because it's hard to conceptualize them without some sort of skeletal structure to apply them to, or sometimes it's easy to overlook them because we care so much about the skeletal motifs and learning those shapes that sometimes it's easy to forget to add a layer or to add an echo or to add overstitching or to remember to close our lines and turn them into shapes. Now the thing that's just so great about part 3 in the book though is that these design principles can be applied to any motif that you put in your toolbox, whether it's one of the 20 that are in the book that I've showed you, or other motifs that you've already learned elsewhere or that you want to learn that you didn't see in the book. These design principles are generally applicable to lots of different avenues of your free motion quilting. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed it. You're doing a wonderful job on your graffiti quilting journey. So keep on keeping on, keep watching the videos and doing your practice and doing the design challenges. And I am excited to see where your free motion quilting journey takes you. Happy quilting.